glad to see that some people are still here, not on the way to the airport, so thank you very much for coming. Our session is titled Up and Running, Developing a Successful Digitization Program. And I am Diana Folsom from the Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I am a recent transplant to this region, even though I have a lot of family history in this area, and I have to tell you, I'm really loving being here. There are great people in this region, and this panel is a good example of that. The 4 museums represented here represent this kind of Texas, Oklahoma region, kind of the middle of the country. They're really actively engaged in systematic digitization of their collections. And I find it interesting that this seems to be kind of a pivotal point in time, kind of a tipping point for activity in this area. And there's a wealth of important objects in what I call the big middle of the country. That's what my mother calls it. She's a Texan. She always uses the word big whenever she says middle. So it kind of fits. The cultural sector is alive and thriving here. I'm going to walk through the list of presenters and just show you the impressive buildings which show how important they are to the communities. And then we'll let them talk and show you some beautiful pictures. So Robert Cross, right next to me, he is our senior photographer at the Gilcrease Museum. And this is a picture of our 3 locations. We have the main Gilcrease Museum building and oh, is it not working?
Click again.
Oh, one more. There we go. Okay, I see. Okay, I'm not used to this presentation mode, so the slide on the right is ahead of the of the slide that you're seeing. Sorry about that. So this is the Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You see in the bottom with kind of arched doorway is our main building, the main museum. On the upper left is our new Helmrich Center for American Research, HCAR building we've just opened to house our incredible archives and library materials. And on the right is our downtown facility in the Brady Arts District, the Zero Center, which is a satellite exhibition and art class place. And here is the Amon Carter Museum. Jana Hill and Steve Watson are both going to be representing their institution. I think there is a lot more to this building and to their institution than what I've shown you here, more than one building, but I have to say I really love the design of the, this is the Philip Johnson architecture. It's just really a beautiful, beautiful, important space and a great place to visit. And then the Museum of Fine Arts Houston is where Matthew Golden is working. And that's an incredible institution as well. I think it has many more sides and buildings to it than what I'm showing here. But this shows that, again, the community considers this an important place that's critical to their community's cultural activities. And then last but not least is the Dallas Museum of Art. And Lenhart is going to be talking about their new efforts. I'm sure everyone's heard about the fact that they've been given a marvelous chunk of money to get their entire collection digitized and cataloged, and that they're going to be going beyond just the kind of basics and doing a very deep, rich educational experience on their site. So Rob is going to be our first presenter. And Rob is actually from Philadelphia. He grew up there. He went to school in Colorado and in Missouri, but he's primarily been a newspaper photojournalist for 25 years. He was a photographer, picture editor, photography website editor. He worked in Raleigh and Tulsa. He joined the Gilcrease in 2008, and he's done both collections and event photography. If you all are in this area, as I'm sure you are, you know that you usually have to do more than one job, especially in the smaller institutions, but he's been doing those jobs very effectively. We're also a part of the University of Tulsa, so he does some image shooting for the university as well as the museum. But now he's been able for the last couple of years to focus on collection photography. So here's Rob.
Thank you, Diana. Move this over here. Just gotta find it here. Here we go.
Yours is
It's right behind Nick.
Yeah.
I didn't even
You're fine.
Let me move. Okay.
Yep. Good afternoon. Yeah, my name's Rob Cross, and I'm from the Gilcrease. I've been there since 2008. And let's get started. This is an Allen Hauser sculpture outside the main entrance. It also happens to be on the Oklahoma license plate, so if you're from the region, you may have seen this on license plates. The museum is located in the Osage Hills area, just northwest of downtown Tulsa, and it was founded in 1949 by Thomas Gilcrease, who, like Amon Carter, was an oil man from the area. He was of Muskogee Creek heritage, and when he was 9, he was enrolled in the tribal rolls, and his allotment was on top of the Glenpool oil field, by chance. And so by the time he was 20 or 19, I think, or so, he was a multimillionaire and had a passion for collecting art. The museum is currently owned by the city of Tulsa. The citizens of Tulsa own the museum, so we're a city-owned museum. And the University of Tulsa has been managing the museum since July of 2008. The Gilcrease has a wide-ranging collection of American art, generally some European art. It's generally outside of Oklahoma, known for its Native American and Western American collection, such as works by Thomas Moran in this wonderful frame. But we have a lot more than that. We have the only known certified copy of the Declaration of Independence and the Articles of Confederation from the time period. And the letter, we have the Declaration and the Articles of Confederation and the letter signed by Ben Franklin and Silas Deane, and they took it over to Europe to drum up support for the revolution and the new democracy that we had founded. And this letter in combination was presented to the King of Prussia. So Gilcrease was collecting colonial as well as contemporary art. This is generally considered one of the first documents sent from the New World back. This is after Cortez had taken over Mexico, and this is one of the first dispatches back to Spain. The artist Rembrandt Peale had a commission to paint President Washington, and he was a little nervous, is this the way the story goes, and he invited his dad along. And this is Rembrandt's portrait, and his dad was there as well, painting Washington from a different angle. And we have Charles Wilson Peale's portrait as well, so it's a really interesting combination. We have works by Whistler, Sargent, Chase, Homer, very much like the Amon Carter Museum, Cassatt, Innes, Sully, Akins, and this is a massive portrait by Thomas Akins, who's from Philadelphia. It stands, what, 12 feet tall maybe or something? It's a larger than life-size portrait. Cropsey, Trumbull, and Jarvis. This is a from-life portrait of Black Hawk and his son, Whirling Thunder. We also have a giant archaeological anthropology collection. This is one of the prized pieces. It's a beaver effigy platform pipe, and this was found in Pike County, Illinois. And I guess, at least the Gilcrease says it's one of the treasures in North American anthropology. We have about 300,000 items in the anthropology collection. Many of them are ceramic and stone items. This is a vessel from Arkansas from the Mississippian period. And this is from Lake Washington, Mississippi. This wonderful piece of stone. But ultimately, of course, the museum is known for its collection of Native American art and anthropology items, as well as Western American art, including Remington's Stampede and Russell's Meat's Not Meat until It's in the Pan, which is a comic, one of his comic pieces. Some of my favorite pieces include Roller Ufer, his work called Hunger, and Ernest Blumenschein's Moon, Morning Star, and Evening Star. We have a lot of Native American art. Thomas Gilcrease, of course, was part Muskogee Creek, and he also had a program where he would hire artists for 3-year periods to help them get started, including Willard Stone and this artist, Woody Crumbo. This is a Rainbow Horse. And this is work by A.C. Blue Eagle. These gentlemen are all from Oklahoma. T.C. Cannon and Jerome Tiger, a really powerful piece from the Trail of Tears. This is the main photo studio in the Gilcrease Museum. And today we have a decent studio, but when I got there in June 2008, this is, I'll give you a few laughs here. I was handed a Nikon D3 and a 60mm lens, and had these giant north lights and a little ancient copy stand and a Rubbermaid cart, and that was the setup. And things have changed dramatically. We first started using digital at the Gilcrease apparently in 2002, and as with many museums, we were using a 5-megapixel camera, and already many of those works have to be reshot, unfortunately, because the technology has changed so much. In fact, a lot of the art I've had to shoot with the D3 has already had to been reshot for publication purposes. As of this month, I did a little calculation. We have 178 objects on the collection section of our website, and that's 0.00045% of the collection. We are making progress.
Did you say the overall collection size?
Of the 400,000
Oh, yeah. Okay,
items. Yeah, I didn't say. We have approximately 400,000 items in the museum. And this number's not changed much on the website in the past decade or so, but things are about to change. We've just gotten a grant from TU. Over the next 2 years, we'll be building a robust website collections presence, and so we're looking forward to launching that, I'm assuming around January 2017, we hope. And that will allow us to upload hundreds of thousands of images and do it effectively, and people can make connections and searches and everything, so it'll be really pretty cool. The museum's management's goal is to digitize everything in the collection as quickly as possible, and I'm assuming that's true at a lot of institutions. But there's certain problems that come along with that. They want multiple images of each object, deep catalog data, robust search engines. 3D objects will have 5 to 7 images per object. Many of our archival objects have multiple pages, sometimes hundreds of pages per accession number. And I figure possibly 2 million images will come out of this. And there's just me. And so what to do? So like a tortoise, we're moving slowly, but we're steadily towards our goal. In the last 3 years, we purchased Gallery Systems TMS, and we just purchased Piction this past year, and we already have 87,000 images on Piction, including several of this oil by called Shoshone Falls by Thomas Moran. If any of you have ever been to the Smithsonian's American Art Museum in DC, this is a sister painting of the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone. Oh, did I go too far?
Forward, I think. That's a blank on the left. Yes.
Okay.
There you go.
There we go. Okay, we're missing one picture. Oh well. This was a sister painting of those paintings. It's massive, I don't know, 15 feet across, maybe 8 feet high, and it's the largest work in the museum and also one of the most popular. I love taking pictures of people in front of the art and seeing how they interact with it. Here's a gentleman looking at the Bierstadt called Sierra Morning, an Alfred Bierstadt painting. Thomas Gilcrease had to sell the contents of his museum to the city of Tulsa because he ran out of money. He was spending it all collecting over the years. In 1954, there was a bond issue, and the citizens of Tulsa purchased the museum and the work inside. And so funding has, with a lot of city-owned facilities, there's generally not enough money over the years, and the University of Tulsa has been great, but they realized the challenge of coming up with millions of images online and the cost it's going to take over the years. Fortunately, we've been able to tap into 2 groups to help out with this effort. Volunteer docents at the museum are called Gillies, Gilcrease Gillies, and we have maybe 200 of them at the museum, I think, and we have about a core of maybe 12 or so who have been helping in the photography effort, doing basic copy stand work where the objects they're handling aren't too fragile, photographs, postcards, some basic archival flat art so they can do the recto and verso. And we also, the University of Tulsa established when they took over the museum a master's degree in museum science and management, and those students also, some of them have half-time jobs as part of their degree program, the 2-year program, to help in the collections. And one of them, Joseph Carriger, has been helping me for nearly 2 years doing some imaging and cataloging. I don't know why these aren't showing up. So. Okay.
There's some lovely photographs here.
Yeah.
Oh, they're not displayed?
No. At least that one
showed up.
Okay. Some more people looking at art. This past summer, 4 interns is an example of the effort we're making and the grants we're getting in. This past summer, 4 interns from the Cherokee Nation copied and cataloged the John Ross collection of 1,407 letters. He was the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation for many years, 40 or 50 years during the removal period. And here a contract conservator, Deborah Baker, is working on the letters. The Cherokee Nation was instrumental in giving us some funding to help her do the conservation and also to hiring some interns to help do the photography and the cataloging of the archive. We recently received an IMLS grant to photograph and catalog our Lemley anthropology collections, a lot of Mississippian period ceramics, and there are about 3,500 ceramic vessels in the collection. And starting in January, as part of that grant, a scholar will be arriving who will photograph and catalog each of those objects over a 2 to 3 year period. Charles Russell is continually popular at the museum. And back in 2009, we purchased the Britzman collection from Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center. It was the basically Nancy and Charles Russell's what's left of their estate, and included 12,749 objects. And this is a letter from Philip Cole, who is an avid collector of Western art, to Nancy about a possible purchase. The Cole collection was Gilcrease's most famous purchase. It was 636 works of art, a lot of Remingtons and Russells, and a lot of other Western artists as well. This is the main photo studio. There's Joseph and myself photographing a Navajo rug, and this pretty much shows the entire photo space. Most of my photography work is for publications, rights and reproduction, curatorial and conservation, loans, insurance, exhibitions, panoramas, and so on. If you're from a photo program, you understand all the competing interests. That's why we depend on the small army of volunteers. About 2 years ago, we were able to set up a team when Diana came in, and to digitize the project. And we have a project manager, a cataloging coordinator, and a lot of half-time student help from TU and other places who are maybe 4 to 5 students at a time are working in the collection, mostly undergrads, some graduate students. And also a team of volunteer docents, like I mentioned, usually about between 5 and 10, helping with the photography and also scanning 4x5 film transparencies as well. We have several thousand of those.
It's a management challenge, as you can imagine.
Yes. Suddenly I'm going from being the photographer to managing 10 to 15 people, and that's been a real interesting development. And space in museums, as you know, is always a problem, and here we have carved out space in the conservation lab. Okay. Here our cataloging coordinator, Jennifer McKinney, left, works with some students on the Britzman collection. Some other students working. That took years. It was about 5 years to photograph and catalog the collection of 12,000 objects. Here's some graduate students moving some of the ethnographic material in the anthropology area. We're in the middle of a massive move. We're going to be moving the archives over to a new building that TU, the University of Tulsa, just built, and the walls are going to be knocked down, and anthropology is going to be expanded into the current archival space. Once again, here's Deborah Baker conserving some Ross papers. Here's Hugh Selman. He's one of our gillies. Here he is photographing postcards from the 101 Ranch, which is a historic ranch up near the Kansas border in Oklahoma. And one challenge with the gillies, the volunteers, is quality control, of course, and we try to maintain we watch as closely as possible, but people are people, and a lot of numbers being transposed, sometimes dirty backgrounds, and we just have to, it's just part of management. You just have to constantly stay on top of the situation and maintain that quality control. Another problem we have is one gillie may do 30 to 40 objects in a 3-hour period. Another gillie may do 200. So we have a huge a range in what they can output, but we're not turning people down. We're still moving forward, getting things done. Here's some students measuring oil paintings in our painting storage area. And we have about 12,000 pieces of prints, watercolors, etchings, oils. And one further challenge, of course, is a lot of the works on paper. We have about 1,000 Thomas Moran sketches. Thomas Gilcrease purchased the Moran studio after one of his kids passed away. and a lot of them are very fragile, and so I'll probably be the one to end up doing those. We have the main studio space, which you've seen, and to accomplish our goals, we're going to have to set up 3 more portable temporary studios. So we're going to have, as of January, we're going to have 4 studios with input coming in to me. And so this is the in the current archives, and this is where the Gillies are working on photographing archival documents. And after the move, smaller flat art will be shot here, like watercolors and prints. In the new building, we have a large photographic studio with nothing in it yet. This is a portable stand we're setting up at one end. We hope to have 2 large copy stands and equipment in here at some point. There's a cataloging room off to the right, and Diane and her team will move in here soon and take over half of this space and some of the space to the right. So the cataloging operation moving forward will be in the new Helmrich Research Center. And also in anthropology, we're going to have a temporary space where the person working on the Lemley grant will be shooting objects, and then we'll eventually in the new anthropology space have a permanent photography studio since we have so many items there. And that's all I have to report. And thank you. Okay. That's right.
Sorry, maybe I can slide a little bit. Great. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, we have our work cut out for us at the Gilcrease Museum. And we get a lot of advice from our peers, people like Peter Brenner here at LACMA. He is always helping us with advice. And next we're going to hear from 2 people who are going to report together, Jana Hill and Steve Watson. They both work at the Amon Carter Museum. Jana Hill has a new title. She's called Digital Engagement Manager, which is, I think, very exciting. She just mentioned that it seems like as she rises in the institution, her title gets more and more vague. but general, that's it. I'll say all-encompassing, maybe. And it's hard to fit in all the details, but so her institution is here in Fort Worth. I hope you all have had a chance to visit or made before you leave. And she's responsible for both organizing the digital initiatives and also for providing access to the museum's content, digital content. But another thing I think she's doing that's very interesting is that she's working across the institution to help the staff use the content more effectively. And I think that's a very interesting and very important aspect of your job that we could all take note of and emulate, I think. And then Steve Watson, right next to her, is also at the Amon Carter. He's been there since 1988, so he started out, I guess, as a darkroom technician, and he's now the senior photographer in the Department of Digital Engagement. So he has worked through this, the big transition from film-based analog efforts to digital photography, and he's worked on many large quantity imaging projects as Jana brings in that money. So it's been very productive, and he currently supports the content creation and dissemination for everything from the museum's exhibitions, programs, publications, and collections. So take it away, Jana and Matt. Excuse me, Steve. Yeah, Matt used to work there. Okay. Let's see if we can get all this gear lined up. Okay.
Okay, so the photo Diana showed of the museum only showed basically our entrance to the museum. That was the original 1961 building that was designed by Philip Johnson to house and display Amon Carter's original collection of between 300 and 400 works by Remington and Russell. And I believe 4 staff, approximately 4 originally managed that collection and space. But in the ensuing 53 years, we've grown by leaps and bounds, and we now have about 125 staff and somewhere around 250,000 objects. Now, over 95% of that is photographic, and the bulk of the photography collection happens to be negatives and transparencies. So there is a large percentage of that collection that can't be displayed, and isn't really available to the public. So with this kind of enormous collection growth, there's also been a related backlog in documentation and photography. When I ended up working with these collections, we had, I think, about 7,500 images representing all of this work. So in 2009, we started really actively looking for grants to fund these kinds of projects. And we ended up with an NEA grant to digitize our Works on Paper collection, an IMLS grant to digitize certain areas in our photography collection, and then an NEH grant, which we just wrapped up this summer, which basically finished digitizing the photography collection, specifically our 8 artist archives, which are housed between the photography collection and our institutional archives. And it also funded creation of collection guides for each of those collections. We now have about 75,000 objects photographed, and I think that's about 83,000 images total for the collection, and 56,000 of those are available online.
As far as embarking on these kind of large-scale imaging projects, really the grants have made it possible. So while our specialized grant projects are going on, I'm still having to cover the normal kind of ongoing coverage that the museum expects through documenting exhibition installations, any new acquisitions that are coming into the collection, exhibit support, conservation support, that kind of thing. Publications, we have a publications program. We're publishing at least 1 book a year. So it's a lot of material just kind of going through our office. One of the kind of workflow aspects we've come up with is having usually 2 positions for each grant. A full-time photographer, and Matthew Golden was one of our grant-funded photographers on a project, and Emily Olson has been our cataloger for several grants now.
You might have seen her volunteering here on Thursday.
She was here on Thursday. She's working within the collections database, cleaning up records, creating records, basically establishing the metadata that's going to be attached to the images later. So having that in place before image creation, I think, is one of the keys to our efficiency. We've got kind of in-house processes for our file naming schemes, the image quality. We always include, a Macbeth grayscale in the shots. We've got our kind of quality control in the image area, or in the images included. We embed metadata into each file right up front, right after creation. We name the files according to key off of accession numbers for collection items. That way, all that kind of identifying data is there and is usable downstream. So once we've got metadata embedded, we can create derivatives, do cropping, create derivatives, copy these things to the places on the museum network where they live, and just try to get the rest of the staff to start using this stuff.
So last year, with Matt's assistance, why is this not working? Okay. So we reached a point finally where everything we have that is exhibitable or that we would reasonably expect to ever reproduce has been digitized. So we we were kind of looking at where to go next. And at that point, we were halfway through a grant, and we managed to get permission to move forward with digitizing some special negative collections. We have about 10,000 nitrate negatives that are very flammable, a little smelly, and kind of explosive. So we like to handle those as little as humanly possible. And sadly enough, those get requested for reproduction fairly often. So we kept finding ourselves having to go and dig through these nitrates or glass plate negatives even, and and constantly pull those. So in the interest of object safety and just streamlining what we're doing, we went ahead and digitized 10,000 of the 10,000 nitrate negatives and an additional 5,000 glass plate and other kinds of special negatives. So where those two lines intersect, it was a very exciting point for us because we reached a huge goal that we really didn't expect to hit so fast. And so this is kind of where we are now, that we have 400 paintings and sculpture done, 8,000 works on paper done, all of those photographs, all of those negatives are done, and the actual art component of those artist archives are done. So now that the core collection is digitized, where do we go? There's no grant funding for just digitizing collections anymore. You have to really make a case that you're integrating that effort into bigger museum projects that will serve specific users. There we go. So, so we've really had to pay attention to where. Be strategic in not only where we were getting funding, but how we were going to get funding and how to really integrate that into the bigger museum strategy. So recently we were awarded an IMLS grant to expand our digitization work into our institutional archives. So we'll be digitizing all of our exhibition history back to 1961 when we opened. That'll include about 10,000 35 millimeter negatives that documented the installations, as well as checklists and other kinds of ephemera related to those shows. It will also fund an online component where we will link that content to records in our collection database, which is online. So the objects and exhibitions and artists and those various facets will all be cross-referenced. Would you like to talk about this?
Well, since we've been able to accomplish imaging the majority of the collection, we're kind of at a tipping point now of we've created assets, let's use them. Let's figure out what we're going to do with them. And kind of from the top down, our director is, as most directors now, has become kind of invested in the idea of engagement. It's all about visitor experience and user engagement. So as of 2 weeks ago, our department was changed from Collections Info and Imaging to the Department of Digital Engagement. And we are in process, the museum is in process now of strategic planning. So we're still kind of figuring out what digital engagement is going to mean for us. But I think we're going to be cooperating and working much closer with other departments, education, curatorial, interpretation, and actually using the assets in projects. And what form the projects are going to take, I'm not sure. We're going to have some online kind of collection guides for the artist estates that are in the collection. We're producing video content. We're probably going to have some in-gallery aspect to this. It's really kind of in the planning stages now. But it's interesting for me to be kind of brought into the more kind of conceptual project area instead of just merely support area, which is kind of where I've lived for most of the museum career I've had. and it makes sense in a way because the people who have been doing the imaging are the ones who've dealt with the objects firsthand. And we've already kind of figured out connections between things and ways to put things in a context that weren't really obvious from just looking through the database. And we've been able to pass some of that stuff along to curatorial. And hopefully that's going to lead to new ways to make connections between things and new ways to present.
So that's kind of where we are now. I'll be interested to see, what we can say this time next year at MCN. But there is my contact information if you have any questions or would like to talk about any of this. And I've included our Instagram because we do about half of that, and we really try to post things on there as we get them done as part of these projects. So there's kind of always a fresh feed of things coming out of our department on there.
All right, scoop down.
Swap. Why is it? No escape. There's no escape.
Let you work on that well. And I'll introduce our next speaker, Matthew Golden. You've seen his photograph already since he most recently worked at the Amon Carter
What's going on?
and helped them with their large digitization projects. Now he is the conservation imaging specialist at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. He has a lot of professional experience as a photographer, and certainly a good bulk for this collection digitization at the Amon Carter. He also teaches photography at the University of North Texas and at Dallas Community College. He is trained as an artist, and he's a member of many professional organizations, and now, of course, he's concentrating on the many complexities of conservation photography.
Howdy. My talk is going to be a little different than where's the pictures? Did we lose connection?
Technology, am I
Yeah.
right?
What's
It's saying source detect, so it has to be something with the.
Cable.
Is that it? Okay.
There we go.
Good,
No.
good. Okay, great.
no dongles? I guess I'll just hold it.
Or I can hold it while you. I'll hold it
I
while
have
you.
a different phone.
Is it still connected?
Dadgum dongles.
Excuse me.
Yay.
Okay, I'll hold it. Think it's all right? Yeah. Okay. Okay, good.
There we go. I'm Matthew Golden. I'm from the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. Thank you for the introduction, Diana, and previously at the Amon Carter with Jana and Steve. So I'm going to kind of take a dog leg and talk about conservation imaging in relation to collection digitization, because I've done a little bit of both. So this is just a little overview of the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. It's an encyclopedic collection of over 65,000 works from 6 continents spanning 6,000 years. We have 12 curatorial departments, 5 buildings for exhibition space, which is soon to be 6, 9 art storage vaults on our main campus, and then 3 off-site art storage facilities. So those 2 last bullet points there are going to be important. or kind of make my life a little difficult sometimes. In the conservation department, we have a total staff of 20, including 9 conservators, 1 conservation scientist full-time, and 3 interns and fellows. Another kind of logistical challenge that I face is that the conservation department is split between 2 buildings. One at the paper conservation, photo conservation, and objects conservation are all at the main campus. Paintings and decorative arts conservation are at an off-site facility about 4 miles away from the campus. So that I spend about half of my time at the main campus and half of my time at the other building. And this is just a breakdown of what our department looks like. Sorry, you can't read any of that. So conservation imaging goals are a little bit different than collection digitization, kind of fundamentally different, I should say. So it's a basic part of the ethical practice of conservation for conservators to document their treatment, document things that they're doing accurately and consistently during the treatment, before, during, and after the treatment, and then also maintain long-term accessibility and preserve those data records. And this is a lovely daguerreotype that we just got from this year. This is a Chevalier. It's a remarkable daguerreotype if you'll ever get a chance to come and see it. So what I do basically in a nutshell is, there's a little bit of kind of traditional digitization is photographing the object under normal light for an examination record, right? Or also technical imaging, which helps the conservators identify and visualize abnormalities. Multispectral imaging, and then also documentation of kind of what we call action shots. So department activities, installations, treatments, all that different kind of stuff. And then also to manage that image archive and get those images out to the rest of the museum who needs them. In many cases, the goal is to show the defect or abnormality, not hide it, right? And these objects are often photographed many times over the treatment period. And there's a slight little piece of dust on the underside of the glazing of this piece is what that image is trying to show. And this is just a few lovely, one of my favorite pieces that we've done so far, this Haystack by Thomas Hart Benton, under normal light, ultraviolet, and then that one on the right is infrared. Here's a detail of the infrared. You can see he has a little grid that he's gridded out, and the kind of gestural graphite drawing lines, on all the plants. It's kind of hard to see, but and a Louis Bourgeois piece that I think is kind of fun. Some specular highlight to get surface detail, and another surface detail of that latex. And Brancusi that the objects conservators are treating, and we were looking at this little kind of scuff on the surface there. It may be difficult to see. So this is a good example of the work. There's not always a one way to photograph the object, right? We're trying to get an image of the flaw or the defect or the abnormality that the conservator is going to treat. This is a pre-Columbian seated female that the museum just acquired earlier this year, and there were some questions. Jane Gills, our objects conservator, had some questions about that bottom part of the feet and the legs, and whether that was original or that was, the thing had been broken. And this is just an image of me photographing it. And some lovely Bugiardini painting. And there's some great pentimento in this piece, in the ear and in the hand. Lots of changes in the composition. So this signifies to the conservator that was not a copy by a apprentice in the studio. This was most likely his own, original work. We do before treatment, after treatment images. I caught myself slipping here using not the same target, so that's not good. And then some nice Anna Atkins cyanotype that was just on display in the camera-less photography exhibition. And then some transmitted light images of a Dorothy Dinner piece. So those are just a sample of the kind of images that we're producing in the conservation department. So it's a little bit different than what you would normally see out of a collection digitization effort. So our workflow is kind of based on two methods, and this is a picture of our paper and photographs conservation lab. On the left is my copy stand. So logistics are going to be one of the things that I'm going to talk quite a bit about, logistics and space. The workflow, normally it's on demand as needed, so that comes from acquisitions, exhibitions, loans, and then project driven. So if, treatment projects that are going to be long term, I sit down with the conservators and discuss an imaging plan and how we're going to go about doing that. The on-demand part of it it's fairly straightforward. The conservators will get a conservation examination request from a curator, which is generated through TMS and sent through email. I then get a conservation photo request from the conservator dealing with the object, also generated through TMS, and then I photograph it, and so the conservator can begin treatment if necessary. And this is just a sample of our conservation examination request. So some of the reasons, acquisition, exhibition, deaccession, outgoing loan, incoming loan. So I don't photograph every outgoing loan. Certain departments prefer that I do it. So our paper conservator has me photograph almost every paper object that goes out on loan. So, but the paintings conservators don't. So it kind of just depends on from conservator to conservator. And this is my the conservation imaging request that I get. And so there's a few important aspects here. One of the things I requested to have added on to this request is object size, object dimension. So I would get a request for something and I would have no idea before I saw it how big it was, right? So, and you'll see in a few minutes why that was really a problem for me. And then the other project-driven workflow is kind of more pre-planned and kind of ongoing. This is we're in a gallery space here doing a treatment on a Anselm Kiefer piece. So we often, if we can, when it's possible, we'll take over gallery spaces, but that doesn't happen very frequently. And this is the image we got of the Kiefer, Sorrow of Nibelungen, in the gallery. And it's the verso shot. So, and the new stretcher that we're going to put it around. Another kind of project-driven object that we're working on is this piece by F&D Cartier, and this is called Wait and See. So all those are very old photographic papers that this couple has collected over time, and they're not fixed, so they're just sitting there changing. And if the color's not great, but these things are changing, right? So I'm documenting it every week. The Toshi Kaseki, the photographs conservator, and we're gathering data, LAB color data from the images to calculate and graph this change over time. And I don't know if the one on the top, the piece of paper on the top right corner has changed significantly over the 11 weeks of the exhibition so far, and this is just what that setup in the gallery looks like. So I can't take that piece, it has to stay in the gallery, so I have to bring lights down, and it's not the easiest thing to do, but it's working. We use the Getty image file naming protocol that was developed at the Getty. So when an object comes into the Museum of Fine Arts, it gets a unique object ID that is separate from, say, a temporary receipt number or an accession number. That object ID number never changes. So when we photograph something that's come in that's considered for acquisition that gets a TR, a temporary receipt, that temporary receipt number will change, but the object number won't, right? So that Vincent Chevalier daguerreotype was at one point TR so-and-so, and now is accession, so it's got its own accession number, but the object number never changed. So that's one reason why we used the object number in our file naming protocol. Also the activity, so that would be before treatment, during treatment, examination, location, where on the piece that we're photographing, illumination, and digital file codes are all in the file name. And then specific illumination details and other details are embedded into metadata, and I also log those kind of old school in a folder, right, that I can go look at. And this is just kind of what it actually looks at. So down here, MFA, every file that I create gets a prefix, MFAH, object ID number, activity code, location code, illumination, And then some, for like archival masters and the DNG, we'll add an AM. The TIFFs and the JPEGs don't get that. And this is just kind of all the different location codes we can get. So we know when you're looking at an image, it's in the file name of what part of that piece you're looking at. Top left corner, bottom left corner, you know, center, recto, verso, inside the 3D object, whatever it may be. And then for lighting, I keep records. This wasn't written by me, but this was an old one. But this is what my studio looks like, and it's got tape on the floor, and you'll see that in a second. So we make pretty detailed records of how the object was lit. So we can do before treatment, during treatment, and after treatment, and replicate that lighting as closely as humanly possible. And this is what we don't have a DAMS right now. So in the conservation imaging, this is our images. This is something that I have full intentions to change and do and get more useful and a little bit more kind of logical and user-friendly. But it works for us right now. I've only been at the museum since January, so this is what I came into, and this is what works. So I'm going with it. But it's a little bit of a mess. So the biggest challenge I face in my position is Workspace, mainly because, like I said earlier, that we're kind of separated between two buildings, so I'm going back and forth a lot. We also have two house museums that house decorative arts, so I often have to go to the art and not the art come to me. And then this is the Paintings Conservation Lab, and this is a Morris Lewis floral that is a commodity piece that we're doing some interesting treatment on. One of our conservation fellows has been working on that for a long time, and it looks nothing like that anymore. That's like a yellow PVA coating that somebody put on it in the 70s or the 80s, so that's gone now, and it looks like a different painting in the best way. So this is just an example of that picture is an urn at Bayou Bend, one of our house museums. So sometimes, you know, the pictures aren't. It's a document, right? It's an image recording what this thing looked like at that time on that day. So it's not often what we would want to publish for a representation of that object, but it is an accurate representation. And this is the copy stand set up in the paper and photographs conservation labs, which causes numerous problems for me. So as you can tell, when I have to start shooting, the lights go off in the conservation lab, so that's not real good for the conservators. They don't like to work in the dark very much. So that's one of the logistical issues, and you can see here we're using flat file drawers for our copy stand, which will change. But it works. You know, it's flat, it's level, it works. And this is another view, my little nook over here in the back corner. So as you can see, there's not a whole lot of space. For photographs and paper, it works fairly well. Most of those objects are not super huge, but we are, as time goes on, things are only going to get bigger, and you know, we all know that. So I have to deal with that. This is the other building where the conservation department, this other half of the conservation department is stored. This is on Rosine Street in the Montrose area of Houston, so it's not next door, but not terribly far away. And this is the photo studio in that building. It's very small. It works great for paintings about that size. This is I'm doing infrared here. That's an Osiris and gas camera there. It's wonderful, wonderful room for paintings that size, but anything much bigger than that, you can see it becomes very problematic. I'm having to shoot paintings in sections and stitch those files together to get a decently lit, you know, image of a large painting, because it'll be way too hot on the edge. I just can't physically get the lights far enough away from the painting to make it work. And this is another image of a piece we just acquired earlier this year, or maybe last year, doing infrared on that. So that's on a paintings card. That's a work on paper mounted to dye bond. So, you know, sometimes things don't go easily on the easel, and we have to kind of improvise on how to get it imaged. And often I find myself in storage facilities photographing work, mainly because that studio, the doors are smaller than that, so many objects won't go into the studio. which is something you would think about if you're planning a digitization program. Make sure your doors are big enough to get the objects through them. This is in that same facility, in the Rosine facility, in the storage areas. We do our best. It's not always optimal, but this situation is better than trying to fit it into that studio and shooting it in sections, which takes the better part of a day. And it's just another image of that setup. So storage facilities, gallery spaces are often, as much as when we can, we take advantage of that, and it's not often, but occasionally. So I've made a little kind of impromptu studio in one of our storage facilities. That's our roll of paper up there. And I set that up to shoot this couch that we just bought. So it works. It's not ideal, but it works. And another example of working in the gallery spaces. So this is a piece that's going into a show that it's very dirty. The conservator is going to clean, and so I just we set it up on that crate, and I just photographed it in there with those examination lights. It's not always like the best, but we make it work. And this is just kind of an overview of our equipment. I thought some of y'all might be curious about it. We're using Hasselblad and Phase 1 for paintings for the larger objects, and then on the copy stand we have a kind of an older Canon DSLR that will be replaced soon. And then an Osiris infrared camera, and then various lighting tools to light. So I say all that to talk. We are going to have a new conservation center built next year. So many of those issues I'm dealing with right now will be resolved by having a studio about as big as this room in the same building as the conservators. So that's gonna alleviate many of those logistical and space problems. The other thing I'm thinking about more as I have been at this conference is how do we make these images more purposeful and give them more meaning. Right now they're just kind of living on a server and get thrown into conservation reports, right? They don't have much of a life. And that to me is problematic. And I need to talk with the conservators more, but I think they can have much more of a meaningful purpose, one way or another. I'm not exactly sure how that would look, and then also thinking about some kind of dams or to help us make these pictures more meaningful and have more purpose is like, how do we manage them more effectively? And that's it. Thanks, y'all. That's big text if you haven't ever seen it.
Great.
Thank you, Matt. That was really interesting, really wonderful to see and learn about what you're doing. And then last, I would like to introduce Ann Lenhart. She is from the Dallas Museum of Art. She's originally from Oklahoma. All right. So we like that. She studied European history. She went to Randolph-Macon Women's College in Lynchburg, Virginia. And then she started her museum career at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And then she joined the Dallas Museum of Art in 2004. And I find this really interesting. Her first job there was assistant to the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer. But I think they must have quickly recognized her great skills and talents at organizing and moving people and great projects forward, because she then moved into the DMA's collections management area 9 years ago. And she's done a lot of other things, devised policies for time-based media, managed large-scale storage updates and improvements. And she recently completed the inventory of the entire collection, and we all know what a job that is. And so now she's been rewarded, and she is playing a major job in managing this new digitization project of the collection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do like to joke that finance and collections are different, and that you are just OCD in different things, but once you're OCD in one thing, you're basically OCD in everything. So my name is Ann Lenhart. I am the permanent collection registrar at the Dallas Museum of Art. And I'll be talking about how we have started our project for digitization. In November last year, so November 2013, it was announced that we received $9 million to promote open access initiatives throughout the institution. So about half that money went to support free admission to the museum, which hopefully somebody here got to take advantage. And the rest of it went to build a new collections website. So the collections website was multifaceted. It is both the user interface that you're seeing as an individual, it's the back end that you're not seeing, it's educational content that's going to be uploaded into the new website, and photography of absolutely every object in the collection. The new content, so the educational content, the curatorial content, has a 5-year timeline, and the photography has a 3-year timeline. They're simultaneous, more or less. We started the photography project officially on the 5th of May, and we're kind of in process of starting the education content now. So of course there was a lot that we had to figure out between the announcement that we got all this money, which is awesome, and the fact that there were a lot of nuts and bolts that needed to be determined before we actually started photographing stuff. We were able to decide that we only wanted to use digitally native files. So for the most part, things that were scans, transparencies, or anything else that was coming off 35mm film was not going to be put online. In addition, we were only going to create publication quality images, so everything was high res regardless. That is how we were shooting it. We then worked very closely with the curatorial staff to develop a very set shot list for each object based on classification, so that we would have something rolling into the project that we knew this is what curatorial wants, as opposed to having to have a curator come and oversee and approve every single shot we were taking. The DMA has approximately, you can all argue about this number, 24,000 objects between its permanent collection and long-term loans, which is kind of ironic because I think then we are officially the smallest collection of anybody on this panel. 300,000? No, we have 24,000. 23, really. About 15,000 objects needed to get photographed. Of those, we'd had a great grant at a previous time to photograph most of our works on paper, so those were already shot. Great, upload them, we're done. So we only have 1,000 that are two-dimensional objects. Unfortunately, that means the remaining 14,000 are three-dimensional objects. That makes an impact only in that we are doing 4 to 5 shots per object of two-dimensional objects and 6 to 7 shots of three-dimensional objects. So when you calculate all that out, you come to a wonderful conclusion of, boom, we need 95,500 objects, images, done, and we have 3 years to do it. I find that the DMA, we all really like statistics. Maybe it's just me. But we had to set benchmarks. We had to make goals of exactly how much content we needed to digitize per week. This kind of shows the graph from when we kicked off in May to right now, last week. It's the first 26 weeks of data. 100 objects per week is our benchmark. Sometimes we've had really great weeks, and sometimes we've had less great weeks. But as a total, in the first 6 months, we have photographed, this is as of last week, thanks to Neil, who's in the back, 3,013 objects, which is averaging at about 115 per week. And we have created 13,478 new image files. So we're doing okay as far as, that's cool, where we are versus where we want to be. Clearly, how to digitize all these things is to throw a lot of people at it. The single biggest commitment we've had is to staffing. And since it is such a interdepartmental process, really, of making a robust online collection, we've hired in all 3 areas. We've hired in IT and imaging, in curatorial and education, and in collections management. So I'm going to go through those quickly. But we also had to buy a lot of stuff. We bought all new cameras, we bought all new servers, we bought all new lighting, we got new object cards, they have fancy schmancy new photo cards. I mean, basically, if it was cool, we have bought it. At least that's what it seems. I don't think I got anything out of it, but that's cool. And then we had to hire more people still after that. In IT and imaging, we already had one full-time developer on staff. We were able to add a second. Together, they worked to create a new back-end database, which we call the Brain, or Brain. It is a MongoDB database. It harvests data from Piction, correlates that through TMS, and then spits out stuff to Pinky, which is our front-end user interface, or the collections website, which launched this summer. It's still very much in its beta form. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that changes over time, but that's where we are right now. In imaging, we had 2 full-time photographers. We added 2 more full-time photographers. Now we have 4. I asked them to give me some details on the equipment we're using, and I have to read it directly because I don't understand any of this. We mainly use ProPhoto, no. Each photographer is using a Phase 1 IQ 180 camera. It didn't say camera. It is an 80 megapixel back, mostly mounted to a medium format camera body. It is the highest resolution camera on the market. We bought everything cool. We mainly use ProPhoto strobes for the lighting. The catwalk is outfitted with Comet strobes. We have 2 wildflower UV lights for ultraviolet fluorescence images. The software that drives the camera and converts from RAW is Capture 1.8. Color balance, crops, and adjustments are done manually. However, there is a copy from last feature which pulls all of the adjustments from the last image to the next, and when shooting many similar objects, it saves a lot of time. Please don't ask me any questions about that at all. For the curatorial and education side, our first process was to rely on the century of information that had been collected by our curators. And then we hired 4 new digital content coordinators whose job is to sift through the decade worth of curatorial information, as well as research external sources and combine to make a nice, concise, interesting label text. We're only doing this for 5,000 of the total objects, but this is the 5,000 hit list, and they have five years to do that. The last changes were to collections management. This is me. I am not in the magic. If we went back to the magic slide, I am not in the magic. I'm just kind of on the edge of the magic. I am not funded by this grant. I am a full-time museum employee. But my responsibility was initially to come up with a lot of the ways that we were going to handle objects through this process. So not anything technical, just the actual works of art. And now my job is to kind of sit back and problem solve, answer questions, figure out ways that we're doing things that are great but could be done more efficiently, and how to work it into bigger museum concerns. So constantly looking at the big picture and saying, yes, let's do that. Yes, let's do that. Oh my God, we can take some photos here. That is what I do now. I also get to manage one of our other new hires, which is the assistant registrar for the digitization of the collection. She is one of the collections management hires, as well as 5 new digital preparators. These 5 digital preparators join the 5 full-time preparators of the DMA, and Katie's job is to kind of manage the day-to-day dealings of all of these preparators, plus the 4 full-time photographers, plus curators' calendars so that they know when objects are being shot, knowing what's going on in the museum, when it's going to take away her staff. Basically, her full-time job is to herd cats. Yeah, this is actually like a super authentic representation of what her job is like. And there's a lot of bless you that goes into her job. Katie also creates the object workflow that we work off of. We use TMS. and everything that we do is based on a location. So that was something that we were really, really firm about in how we were going to do a workflow. Any kind of checklist that we were using started first and foremost of where the object is based in the museum at any given time. Fortunately, our storage spaces are sorted already by classification. So we're going to have a lot of very similar objects stored together. If not, we would need to do additional revisions based on the types of objects, the medium, the size, so that we are, while maintaining very limited object disruption and only moving a piece 1 or 2 times, we're also not expecting our photographers to change sets based on every new piece we bring them. So it's kind of a mutual give and take. After K80 creates the checklist, it gets sent to imaging. Imaging then goes through and verifies if it's a good image, if it's a bad image, if we need to reshoot it, if it came off one of those things that is not good. Then went to curatorial. Curatorial has the chance to voice opinions, concerns, anything else that they want to voice. Goes to conservation. They get to have their say. In the end, it takes roughly a month for one checklist of approximately 100 objects to get approved through the process, which seems like a long time, and certainly it could be a lot faster. And this is going to be like my 2-minute spiel on this. I'm really sorry.
It's okay.
But the most important thing that I think we have realized is that if we don't have this little element of, oh, here we go, curatorial on board, if you do not have curatorial on your side, you have them on the opposite side of you. And that doesn't serve anybody well. So building in time for curators to voice their opinions and to be paid to have the opinions that we do pay them to have as an institution has been a very vital part. Okay, so I got off that soapbox, sorry. Once the final object selection is approved by everybody and their dog, it is given to our preparators, and they go through the process of collecting the objects from storage and take them into object staging and then getting them photographed and then taking them back and putting them back wherever they came from. This whole process, again, looks like it should be really simple. It takes 2 weeks. This is one selection of approximately 100 objects. And it takes that long, again, because we're giving the opportunity for people to come in and give their opinions on things. That's curatorial, that's conservation, that's us getting really necessary cataloging data off the objects because we don't want to handle them any more than necessary, as well as having somebody actually take a photo of them. And they take a lot of photos. So at the same time the object workflow is going forward, the imaging workflow is going forward. They take something out of object storage and photograph it, and photograph it, and photograph it. It gets uploaded each and every day to Piction. And then Brain, this back-end database, it gathers the information from Piction and the information from TMS and does something magical. I don't understand it. But then it goes on the website, and it's real cool. So with those 2 parts understood, you also understand that, excuse me, one of the biggest problems we have, like everybody else on this panel, is space. There's not enough space for 4 photographers to be shooting full-time. We have a photography studio that has worked relatively well always. Does not accommodate really large objects very well, and it really only works for 1 person shooting at a time. So we took a part of art storage, which made me throw up a little bit in my heart, because that's my job, is to manage art storage, and we gave it to this digitization program. I'm so sorry. So now we are in a room, a very big room that provides space for object staging, any kind of cataloging we need to do, and 2 full photography sets in addition to that. We are also taking absolute advantage of galleries. Anytime there is a lull in a gallery, anything with the exhibition construction, deinstallation and demo, if there is more than basically a month, we are on it like white on rice, and we're like, photography, which is great because then we get to shoot really big things. And finally, we basically have decided we can photograph anywhere, as long as it matches the needs of the photographer. It's a secure space, so we don't need to worry about the art. And it isn't too far away for the preparators to move, so we don't want to do it at opposite ends of the building because that's just logistically a nightmare. And all of that on where do we put these people, it kind of leads to my final conclusions on what we have learned in the last 6 months, which is that if your institution is deciding to do a full throttle 100% digitization process, and you might need to remind your registrars a lot of this, you need to be really flexible. Just because you don't want something to happen there because that's not the way it normally happens, like using art storage as a photography studio, doesn't mean it's not the right thing. It's actually worked out really, really well for us to have it in that space. And just because you're not normally the place, on the flexibility that there are a lot of players, there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And at least for us, short of the deputy director, there isn't really one person who says no or yes. So nobody ever gets to be right. Again, you can remind your registrars of that. They're not going to like that very much either. And I think that in order to be really effective, you have to see the forest and the trees. So what the process is doing for digitization, the value it gives the rest of your institution, as well as remembering that the museum has to function and that everything you do can't be about the digitization. Yeah. And this is just a photo, this is my only photo that I included, of our head preparator and our objects conservator, I think giving a samurai his sword before it's photographed.
Also, I've seen
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Gosh, sorry, I know, kind of cold time for people, huh? But you did great. So we've got a lot going on. Do you have questions?
I have a logistical question, I guess, for Rob, actually. You mentioned that you guys were doing scanning,
Yeah.
a 4x5 transparencies as part of the digitization. I wonder if you could talk about what you're using to do the scanning, at what resolution, and who's, or are you addressing cleanup of the scans? Are the Gillies doing dusting as well, or?
No, what, these scans have not been held in these color
To
transparencies.
the microphone, please. If you
All right.
could. Okay, great, thank you.
These color transparencies have not been held in cold storage, and many of them are nearly 30 years old, and they have shifted quite a bit, color. And the conservation people had, and I had talked about, we have these, we may as well, and it shows how the object looked at a certain period in time. At least maybe we can't judge the color anymore, but at least we can judge physically any problems with it. And we agreed to have the volunteers go ahead and scan them. We're using an Epson Expression. It's a large flatbed scanner, and we're just doing about 100 megabytes. I don't, that seems good enough for and we're not having them clean them up or take the dust off or anything. So, in the future, if a conservator needs a picture of Alfred Bierstadt's Sierra Morning, they have a picture of the former photographer had written the date down on these transparencies, so we know from like July 1984 what this looked like. So, does that answer your question?
It does, yeah, actually.
Yeah.
So you guys said, as part of your digitization process, no film.
Right.
So can you talk about what led to that? I guess because I'm in we're going through a new project and we're having this debate, do we address the old film, to what degree, or do we just skip it? So.
I think it's just one of a question of time and money. If you can redo it with something that's better, redo it with something that's better. If you can't, then you don't. You know, and I think that that's basically what the decision was. I mean, we bought really fancy new stuff, so we're gonna use it.
I wonder if also, Steve could answer as well, but maybe after Steve, Peter Brenner, I think, might have some good comments about that, because I know we went through a big effort to digitize some 4x5 transparencies early on, so, which I think were useful. But Steve, you go next.
Well, back in the transition years, when digital cameras were really not high enough resolution for, publication quality. I mean, they were fine for on-screen viewing, for dropping thumbnails into documents, that kind of thing. Back in those days, we're basically shooting both. We were shooting film, we were shooting digital where it could work, which kind of mimicked our workflow where we had parallel tracks of photography. Everything got a 35mm slide. Everything got a 35mm negative. We'd make a black and white 8x10 print. We had file cabinets full of black and white 8x10 prints. And actually the curators would take them and sequence shows. They would use them. They would use physical hard copies of things. But so we were scanning 4x5 transparencies in order to get higher quality digital images. And when finally we were able to upgrade to higher resolution cameras, that started to go away, and particularly when we started to see that shooting direct to digital solves a lot of the problems of dealing with the old objects, the dye fading, the non-standard grayscales and color bars that were in old transparencies, the dust and the scratches, and it's its own rabbit hole to go down and try to solve those problems, or you can start fresh. Now, because we've been imaging for over 10 years digitally in some form or another, we have kind of different generations of files that live on our network. We haven't gone back and comprehensively redone. As we upgrade cameras, we the things that get used a lot, and everybody knows what the faves of the collection are that get used a lot, get pulled back in to do the latest, greatest, highest res, unless it's just something that's not very accessible. And then, as needed, we refresh. We go back and refresh as a request comes in. We don't have anything that's current, or we could do it a lot better now, so we refresh. But we don't really comprehensively go back and refresh. It's just as needed.
And it doesn't happen very often.
No, what we've found is that what we've got, and a lot of it is in the 12 to 16 megapixel range, is good for about 95% of our requests. So, I like to go back and, kind of repolish and do a better version of things, particularly if it's going to be a publication or something that's got a long life, and we want to have our best foot forward on that.
Yeah, I guess we're kind of in a similar position. We've got, you transitioned a few years before us. We've got really nice, reproduction quality 4 or 5, transparencies that are less than 10 years old. It just seems crazy to just abandon those, but then the effort that it takes to scan as opposed to rephotograph, it's kind of like, it's not a huge difference. So, to do it at a refresher quality with cleanup and all these things. So, I'm looking into camera capture solutions for digitizing film rather than, we have a Hasselblad, Amon now, and it's great, it's sharp, it's slow.
Could I have you guys use microphones? You could pass that one around if you want. I forgot. I should have mentioned that earlier.
Well, we've kind of changed. We've had an Amon scanner to do our kind of in-house transparencies. We weren't using it really to work on some of the film in the collection, particularly since it really flexes. And then we've got antique things, nitrates and glass that we can't put through it. But we've transitioned to shooting with digital back and Lightbox. We've kind of improvised, cut custom cut masks to fit formats of film that we have in our collection. Some of the older formats aren't standard to what, you know, current film sizes would be. And it's worked. Again, we could get probably better quality by going with a high-res scan or super close-up doing tiling, but we find about a 22 megapixel capture on a piece of film. It certainly gets us a full-page illustration in a book. It gets you pretty deep into the image on screen. And, you know, good enough is good enough. So.
Could you just comment a little bit on your experience with the 4x5 transparencies and just your thoughts?
Okay, we actually had about 17,000 images that we were debating whether to go ahead and either recapture or outsource it, or if it was going to be more cost effective to do it in-house. I would say probably a 7 to 10% of those 4x5 transparencies were images that were in our top 100 list. So we decided, as opposed to rescanning these, and these would be transparencies that could have been 5 to 15 years old. We opted at that time. We got into digital imaging early 2000, and after reviewing some of those transparencies, we felt we could get a better image for reproduction. Even though we had to bring the image back in, rehandle it, but we decided to go ahead and shoot it at its highest resolution possible, make the derivatives from that, but keep the 4x5 transparencies in the archive for possible use. Another instance that we decided we would keep the transparencies was because if the object was actually out on loan and we didn't have the availability to bring it into the studio, rephotograph it, at least we had something that we could send out for publication purposes.
And you did scan those 4x5s, though, right?
We did scan a good majority until we got halfway through the process, and then determined it was much more advantageous to bring the artwork back in and rephotograph it. Because now what we're doing is, when we pull the artwork back in and are looking seriously at these transparencies, we could be doing a much better job with the quality of the digital capture. I mean, it's made huge advancements in the last 5 years.
With the DMA project, since you're extracting your data out of TMS in the process, have you set a baseline for what fields have to be updated and cleaned up? Or are you just taking what you have, and then who is a part of that process?
No. It was decided that the nature of this project was not to necessarily refine the metadata in TMS exactly as it is, but rather to take advantage of what we had and roll forward with that. Because, which you can clearly tell, like, I don't like that at all. I hate that. But because the website and the software that we've designed is dynamic enough, it takes any change that we make nightly, and that is something that our curators do every day. So.
Thank you.
I have a question for Anne. How did you set the benchmarks for the digitization workflow? Was it a process where you set your goal and kind of said, how many do we have to do a month to hit this? Did you go from the current pace that you were doing it at? Did you talk to other institutions that had done the same process?
I think some of that comes at a higher pay grade than I know. But in reality, I mean, we were told, this is how much time you have. This is how much money we funded you for. Make it happen. Which I think is kind of universally realistic, and that you're told how long you have to do something.
Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you very much. Great panel.